Welcome to more World of Warplanes content from this channel, and in this video we'll be taking a first look at the up-and-coming reward aircraft, the Tier 6 American Heavy, the Vultee XP-54. Yesterday the World of Warplanes team released further information on how we're all going to be able to obtain the forthcoming reward aircraft, the Tier 6 American Heavy Vultee XP-54, otherwise known as the Swoosh Goose. In short, you'll have to get hold of an operation order, and once you've got hold of that operation order and activated it, you'll have to work your way through a chain of combat missions. There are 20 in all, as you can see, and should you complete all of them, you will be awarded the aircraft. So the question becomes, how do you lay your hands on an operation order? Those will drop as a random prize from special supply crates. And now the question is, how do you get hold of the special supply crates? Two ways. You'll be awarded special supply crates if you participate in the Flaming Hawk event, which will start on May the 20th, and there is the dates and times, and that will run for approximately a month. Note, this event is only for Tier 4 aircraft and above. If you don't have any of those, apart from recommending that you get yourself one as soon as possible, you can also buy special supply crates for 750 gold. But that comes with a warning. If you're buying these crates, you aren't guaranteed to get it in your first crate. All I can say is, from past experience, the operation order is likely to drop with a fairly high probability, but it's not guaranteed. If you're wondering what you can do if you haven't got time to complete the chain of combat missions, or you're just impatient, you will be able to buy certificates in the premium shop that will allow you to skip a number of the legs of the combat missions, or indeed all of them. If you choose the latter option, be aware you're likely to end up paying the usual price for a Tier 6 premium aircraft. So here's the World of Warplanes team's fact sheet for the Vultee XP-54. And if we scroll down, we can see the narrative that describes the aircraft. Be careful with this. Some, none, or all of it may be true. Spoilers, not all of it is true. And if we scroll down a little further, we'll see the specifications for the aircraft, and you may think that these would match the information that's available in-game on existing aircraft. I'm afraid that's not entirely true either, as I'll explain later. So wouldn't it be nice if we could now go and compare the Vultee XP-54 with existing aircraft? I'm afraid you can't. This aircraft is not entered in the database that powers the Compare Aircraft facility, and indeed the previous two reward aircraft, the F-82E Twin Mustang and the Grumman F-5F, are not available either, and it rather looks as if the World of Warplanes team has abandoned this facility. That's a shame. So, in that case, what I've done is I've manually extracted the information in the game that's available for all of the Tier 6 heavies. It's over here under this section, and you can expand these sections to get more details on the various attributes of the aircraft and its modules. I've also taken a look at the fact sheets for each of these Tier 6 heavies that you can see listed along the bottom, and I've blended the information into a workbook, and we'll use that for the comparison. So here's the workbook that I created for the purposes of comparing the Tier 6 heavies, and just a warning, quite a lot of detailed information is currently hidden. We'll come on to that in a bit. If we just quickly look at the layout of the workbook, we see that the Vultee XP-54 occupies columns C and D, and the other aircraft at Tier 6 also occupy two columns. The first two are premium aircraft, the last four are the regular aircraft. For the purposes of this comparison, I took off skilled pilots and replaced them with untrained pilots. I took off equipment and I took off consumables. And that gets me back to raw figures for these aircraft, and that gives me the fairest comparison with the Vultee XP-54. What that should also warn you is that when you have the XP-54, you'll be able to put on equipment, a good pilot, and consumables that will improve the performance of the aircraft. There are 6 main parameters with hidden detail currently. Let's start looking at them. If we look at gun armament, we can see that the ME410 is rated as first in class. However, the Volte XP-54 is rated as second in class, so that's a good start. Bombs and rockets? Well, the Vultee XP-54 doesn't have any bombs and rockets. This is not an aircraft to go attacking ground targets with, despite what the fact sheet says. You won't be surprised to learn that the two Mosquitoes, which edge into multi-role territory, are the best in class at this for this parameter. Survivability, it's sort of a medium figure here. The Volte XP-54 is not best in class, but it's not far behind the Mosquitoes and the ME-410, and it appears to be better than the P-38A Lightning and the Grumman XP-50. Airspeed, and here we have the first rating where the Volte is best in class. It's a rating of 58, faster than all of the other aircraft in theory. We'll need to discuss that in a little more detail when we come to the details that are hidden. However, since the Maneuverability is 49, which is equal best in class with a highly maneuverable Ki-102, what we appear to be looking at is a fast aircraft that is also nimble. And that's an interesting combination. Finally, altitude performance. The Volte XP-54 is second in class. It can't climb as far as the P-38A Lightning, but it can get above, in theory at least, all of the other aircraft at Tier 6. So now we need to take a closer look at the gun armament in detail. And if we look along row 3 here, we can see that the total DPS for the ME-410 is 600, and that's why it has the rating of 36 overall, and the Volte has a rating of 490. There's something to note here though. Most of this 490 comes from the cannon, which is 400 DPS, and this cannon has a rate of fire of 120. That tells me that this cannon is likely to overheat quickly and may take a while to cool down if you let it overheat. It's also relatively short range. It's 1837 feet, and whilst that's comparable to the 30mm on the ME-410 at 1890, the ME-410 has the advantage of 20mm cannons that fire at a considerably greater range at 2363 feet. And if we look at the cannons for, say, the Mosquitoes, we can see they have a greater range. And although the Ki-102 57mm cannon is relatively short range, it also has 20mm cannons that will fire at 1969 feet. What this means is that this aircraft probably isn't best going head on with other heavies. It will start to take damage before it starts inflicting damage. And frankly, why would you do that? If the maneuverability is as good as it says, all you need to do is evade and then get behind the enemy heavies. At least that's the theory. The machine guns are much of a muchness. They do 90 damage per second at 1700 feet. As you can see, if you look across here, the Grumman XP-50 has quite similar figures. The Mosquito's .303 Brownings are considerably shorter range, but it will start hitting you with those cannons, which is its main armament, a lot sooner. The ME-410, the machine guns really aren't the main weaponry in this. They're more or less an adjunct. They're fairly short range as well. The P-38 Lightning is perhaps the one aircraft where you might one heavy aircraft at Tier 6 where you might consider going head to head, but it would be a fairly equal contest. My recommendation on the evidence of these figures is that evade and outmaneuver enemy heavies and get behind them. The one exception possibly is the Ki-102, but you have the option of just flying away from that and coming back to attack it when it's forgotten all about you. So this looks like quite a versatile aircraft in terms of its armament, provided you exploit its maneuverability and provided you watch the cannons like a hawk and do not let them overheat. The last thing to mention about the armament is that we don't know anything about the dispersion values, i.e. the accuracy. At a guess, the 37mm will be quite inaccurate, and that means at maximum range of 1837 feet you may miss quite a lot, and that's even more of a reason to use your maneuverability to outplay other heavies. The next category is bombs and rockets, and that's easily dealt with. The Volte XP-54 doesn't have any bombs and rockets. You shouldn't be taking this aircraft ground attacking unless you have a soft target that you can destroy and that will flip a sector, and that's going to happen quite rarely. So moving on to survivability, let's open up the detailed information. And immediately we can see that we have some missing information on the fact sheet. We do not have information about damage resistance and fire resistance. All we have are hit points, middling figure. The Mosquitoes and the ME410 have 400 hit points. At 350, the Vultee XP-54 is the same as the Lightning. I think that means he's going to feel a bit fragile, as indeed the KR-102 feels a little bit fragile, and the Grumman XP-50, being a relatively nimble and light aircraft, is even worse. If we hide that information, let's look at airspeed and see what we've got. Apologies for that mishandling there, and again I'm afraid we have missing information. Cruise, maximum boost speed and boost duration are all not unlisted on the fact sheet, so we're going to have to work with the other two items, which are maximum dive speed and the top speed at best altitude, which is an interesting figure, but we'll come on to that. The maximum dive speed is impressive at 559. This is best in class, even better than the P-38J Lightning. And immediately what that tells you is if you get taken by surprise, certainly by a tier 6 heavy, and you are at altitude, which for the most part you will be, you can employ a dive to get away. It also will allow you to dive on aircraft below you and hit them with your cannons and your machine guns. The slight problem there is that the cannons are likely to be quite inaccurate, so you'll have to be considering equipment like a gun sight and pilot skills like Marksman 1 and Marksman 2 if that's a favourite method of attacking. But certainly this dive speed is eye-catching, and it allows you both to escape enemy aircraft, it would appear, and dive on unsuspecting aircraft and damage them severely. The fact sheet has top speed at best altitude, and this is rated at 382 miles an hour. Surprisingly, that's lower than the Grumman, and I say surprisingly because the overall rating is 58 and the Grumman has 56. I wonder how this figure is calculated. It looks like the maximum dive speed is making a significant contribution to this 58. In fact, this top speed at best altitude is lower than the Mosquito FB-26, and I actually think there may be a problem with the fact sheet for the Mosquito FB-26. When I look at the DH-98 Mosquito, the regular tech tree aircraft, and I see 378, and I know it's got better engines, why would the Chinese Mosquito be faster? Is it because it's lighter? Be careful, that's all I can say. Having said that, the top speed at best altitude appears to be better than that of the ME410. It's not that far behind the very rapid Lightning, and it's certainly faster than the KI-102. So, when we said that the airspeed was best in class at 58, it appears largely to be down to this impressive dive speed. Bear that in mind. You may not want to try and fly away from other heavies in horizontal flight. Turning to maneuverability, and it looks like it's all good news. Again, we've got missing information. Fortunately, I don't think it's too significant. The minimum optimal speed and the maximum optimal speed, most of you will not pay attention to that when you're in manoeuvring. You'll be paying attention to what you're trying to outmaneuver. If we look at the turn rate, it's 12.3 seconds, and that's the same as the KA-102, so it looks as if this really is a nimble and manoeuvrable heavy, despite its apparent ability to move quite quickly as well. And the roll rate is the best in class, significantly better than the rather appalling Mosquitoes, and better by 10 degrees per second than all of the other heavies, except for the ME410, where it's 30 degrees per second better. If we look at stall speed, that's something that people are going to have to possibly exploit if they're in their heavies and you are attacking them. If they are already relatively slow and they can slam their air brakes on and get down to their lowest stall speeds in the Grumman XP-50, the two Mosquitoes and the KO-102, you may then find yourself flying past them and at a disadvantage. Not many pilots are good enough to exploit stall speed. You're probably not going to get caught out that way. And if we look at the fact sheet's optimum airspeed, again, something that's tricky to pay attention to when you're trying to engage in maneuvers to outplay an enemy aircraft. It's the highest of all of them. You need to try and keep this near the top of the range of its speed rather than low, otherwise you'll start to bleed off your characteristics and advantages. But in general, this is good news. Finally, let's take a look at altitude performance, and as we said before, the rating is second in class. We do have missing information. The service ceiling, we don't know it yet. It's likely to be in the same kind of area as the Grumman XP-50, the ME-410 and the P38J Lightning, perhaps a little less than this figure here. I would guess it's probably going to be 1300, 123, but we'll have to wait. The maximum optimum altitude is definitely second in class, behind the P38J Lightning, but you will have the opportunity to fly well above any of the other tier 6 heavies, and that will give you an advantage. The climb rate is reasonable, but it's not best in class by a long chalk. The Grumman XP-50 appears to have an excellent flight rate and climb rate, which I didn't realise before. That's something I'm going to have to investigate. We all know about the Lightning's climb rate, which is significantly better, but you'll be able to outclimb all of the other tier 6 heavies. So let's try to gauge what the Vultee XP-54 will be like in combat. Against other heavies at its tier, I think the best tactics are going to be using evasion and outmaneuvering to either get above or behind your enemy to shoot them at a relatively short range with powerful cannons. The exception may be the Japanese heavies, where you will want to fly away and re-engage when you have an altitude or positional advantage. You should avoid ground attacking, except in very rare circumstances. This aircraft has no ordnance. It also has middling survivability for its class, so you will want to try and avoid being shot, and with a rear-mounted engine I think we can predict that there will be lots of critical hits there. We've noted that the high airspeed rating seems to derive in large part from an excellent dive characteristic, and the dive characteristic will offer you an escape method if you're in serious trouble, and also an attack approach on unsuspecting aircraft, provided you can land what I suspect will be relatively inaccurate cannons. In other circumstances, you will be able to use the excellent manoeuvrability of the aircraft against other tier 6 heavies. The altitude performance is good enough against all other heavies except perhaps the P38J Lightning to allow you to get above them and attack possibly in a dive. So, given that set of characteristics, what's my feeling about this aircraft? Well, I think it's going to be very strong at tier 6 if you give it a good pilot and equipment and consumables that enhance either speed or manoeuvrability or both. A balancing factor may be the accuracy and short range of the guns, but I predict in the hands of a good player, this is going to be a very difficult aircraft to counter. And even the rest of us mere mortals should find it rewarding to fly as well. Truthfully, I'm not so sure that the World of Warplanes team should be making reward aircraft that appear to be this strong, at least on paper, but nonetheless I'm looking forward to flying it. I hope you found something of value in this video, and that if you did, you'll come back and see more of my future content. But until then, this is the Noble Q, aka Royal Flying Corps, signing out.